So yeah, so at the export options, you can change here. There's a thing that says like camera in betweens. So what this will do is if you have a start position and end position of your camera, it will put extra keyframes in between there as well as your keyframes for your drawings. So you have a smooth amount to look through. So say I have this scene. So I'm going to click render panel. So it's going to take a bit. As long as that's blue, you know what's rendering. Okay, so if I go into editorial, let's turn this off. So it's created a folder, and my panels are all in here. So let's drag this out. So it's done still panels of every keyframe. You can also do this for the entire project as well. So you can click render as panel sequence when you're in the editorial, and that will do it for the entire project, not just the scene you're in. This one's going to be a good example of how the camera in-betweens work. So this one here, there's actually not any drawings really happening in the scene. So there's no keyframes apart from the movement of the camera. So when I've set the in-betweens here, this should create at least 10 different drawings to represent this one scene. And changing this number will change how many little subdivisions between the camera will be captured. So this is something that's adjusted on a scene-by-scene basis. By default, it's set to 3, but you can change it. Okay, so that's done rendering. So if I go back into my editorial, you can see there's a whole bunch of different frames capturing different moments of that shot. So if you were showing this as stills to like a director, or you're putting slideshow on your website, you can plug these right in. Then another feature that's in here too is you may have noticed there's the convert and export options. So I can actually turn this into a PNG. Essentially, this is just exported that image. So if I go up one level, there'll be another folder for this, and now I have that drawing is now a PNG. So say you did a background that you wanted to paint, you could draw it in grease pencil, export it, paint it in Photoshop or Clip Studio, another program, bring it back in, and have a fully rendered background. So this is the most efficient speed-wise because it's the most simplistic form of rendering. This one's the next most efficient. I prefer working in this one because it gives you a really clear view of what your scene will look like without the same slowdown as this one. Also for the add-on, it caps the amount of samples to 8 in order to make things work faster for board artists. Because, you know, we're not doing like fully, you know, fancy rendered stuff. We're still like the pre-production, making the outline and the animatic. It doesn't need to be like super pretty. So to make it easier on beginners, the add-on will cap the amount of rendering samples to 8, because otherwise it will be really taxing on your computer, especially when you go to render. So with the add-on, I don't have the ability to change how Blender's rendering works. I hope in the future they will get faster and faster, as they will. But right now, for people using, say, like lower-end graphics cards, it's better to have it capped, so every user will have a similar experience. When you're rendering, you'll likely want to render a material preview, unless you have a specific scene that's using, like, you know, like a rack focus on a grease pencil object. Because this is another thing with Blender that's a potential issue, is even though I have limited the amount of render samples, it still takes a significantly long time to render fully rendered versus it does material preview. So generally with the material preview, I found it's like between 2 to 3 seconds to render a single second of video, and I found rendered can be highly unreliable and changes depending on how complex your geometry is. So you should want to use like low to medium poly assets. I know like Paul in here, like he does a lot of crazy high poly assets. He was actually the reason I implemented the render cap on the amount of samples, because like he was using something, it was like it had 10 times the amount of polys in a single scene than I had in like the entirety of this project. And yeah, that took way too long to render, so I put that cap in place. So it's best to render a material preview only in situations where you have you actually need like a rack focus, would I recommend using full rendering settings. Unless you are working with, fairly low poly assets, in which case it shouldn't be that different. There's more information about this in troubleshooting, including like the benchmark of what I use to test. Now, you can see here when I'm in material preview, the rack focus isn't working on our character. That has to do with Blender, where it treats the blur on a character as an effect, which only happens in full render mode. So to get around that, like here, if I switch into render preview, you can see the blur happening. Let's jump to the wrong scene there. Turn on single scene so we can stay here. So if you want to see effects happening to your grease pencil objects, you want to be in rendered view, but material preview is better for most efficiency. And same goes for when you're previewing. When you go to rendered view, you'll be able to see the change happening. But keep in mind, rendered view, it's doing like a full render of your image to show you the preview, so your playback will slow down significantly. So it's always best when you're previewing to either be in material preview or solid if you're not taking advantage of the line art.